morning, Wildcats. My name is Miss Craney. I'm a biology teacher, and we're going to spend just a few minutes reviewing a topic that's covered in the Biology HSA, osmosis and diffusion. So you should have received a handout that looks like this from your teacher. So take a second to put your name on that handout. Alright, so we're looking at the big picture of cellular movement today. And the first thing we need to think about is that all living things are made of cells. So humans, salamanders, oak trees, even the bacteria that gives you strep throat is made up of cells. One structure that all of these things have in common is the cell membrane. So go ahead and write in the cell membrane in the second bullet here as one structure that every cell, from bacteria to humans to plants, all those cells have in common the cell membrane. Okay, underneath that bullet you have a picture of three different types of cells. First you have an animal cell, a plant cell, which are both eukaryotes, and also a bacterial cell, which is a prokaryote. So take just a moment and try to draw an arrow to indicate the cell membrane in each of these three types of cells. Okay, so first for the animal cell. You should have drawn an arrow to indicate this right here as the cell membrane. The plant cell is a little bit trickier because it has a cell wall that's immediately on the outside. So you should have drawn an arrow to the inside line as the cell membrane, right inside that cell wall. And then finally for the bacterial cell, you should have drawn an arrow right here to indicate that this is the cell membrane. Okay, so all of these different, very diverse types of cells have this cell membrane. So what's the point? What's the function? So now I'm looking at the bullet underneath the pictures, so follow along with me, please. The cell membrane gives the cell its shape, and it also determines what enters the cell and what can leave the cell. And this is very important for making sure that our cells get all the water, nutrition, and food they need, and it's also important so that the different waste that we don't want to keep in our body anymore can leave the cell. Structurally, the cell membrane is made up of mainly phospholipids. You may also have heard them in biology referred to as just lipids. And a few proteins, but over 95% of the membrane is made up of these phospholipids. Okay, and here's a very small picture here, and I'll show you a movie in just 1 second. And you see these yellowish regions are the heads of the phospholipids, and then they have tails that merge right in here. And so you have this bilayer of phospholipids making up the cell membrane of every single kind of cell. Can we stop for just a second? Okay, so here's a larger picture of what one of these cell membranes might look like. And again, the top is this row, one row of phospholipids, and the bottom is the second row of phospholipids making up this bilayer. And like I told you, some things can enter the cell and some things can leave the cell, but not everything. So I'm going to show you a quick video clip of what this looks like. And I want you to keep your eyes on this pink and purplish type molecule. This is a water molecule. So watch what those molecules can do. So molecules are constantly in motion, and things like the water molecule can slip right through the membrane and get inside the cell. Okay, so you see different molecules going inside the cell. You also will see some of these molecules being able to get outside of the cell, go back through the membrane to leave the cell. On the other hand, you have these bigger molecules like this right here, and if you watch, this is going to get close to the membrane, but because it's so big, it can't actually fit through any of the pores in the membrane, so this is blocked from getting inside your cell. Go back to that. Okay, so now I'm going back to your handout, and I'm on the third bullet underneath the pictures on your handout. So certain things are able to enter and leave the cell. Examples are water and nutrients. So go ahead and write water and nutrients into that third bullet. And then, though some things are able to enter and leave the cell, other things are blocked from entering the cell. And things that we really don't want in our cell are things like bacteria or viruses that are going to cause disease, specifically like the H1N1 virus that we've heard so much about in the past few weeks. And the reason why a lot of these molecules are blocked from the cell is because of size. So the smaller you are in terms of being a molecule, the easier it is to get through the membrane, but larger molecules, like you saw in the video, are often blocked from entering the cell. Now we're on the last bullet underneath those pictures. So why does this matter? Well, because the cell membrane allows some things to enter and leave, but not all, we call the cell membrane selectively permeable. So write this term into that last bullet above diffusion and osmosis, selectively permeable. Permeable is just a word that says whether or not it can get in and out. So for example, if I can permeate the door, if I can permeate the classroom, that means that I can walk in and out of the door, no problem. So I can get inside and outside of my classroom, but something like an elephant is going to be blocked. And the same sort of thing happens with the cell membrane. Something small enough to fit through the lipids can go right into the cell, but bigger things are going to be blocked. So that's selectively permeable. Now we're going to think for a moment about two different ways that things can enter and exit the cell. Hopefully these concepts are pretty familiar to you. They're called diffusion and osmosis. So we're at the bottom of your handout now for diffusion and osmosis. Diffusion is the movement of any molecule from a high concentration to a low concentration across the membrane. That's what diffusion is. So if we're talking about gas, if we're talking about nutrients, even if we're talking about bacteria or viruses, if they're moving across the cell membrane into the cell, that's called diffusion. Osmosis is a specific type of diffusion. So osmosis is specifically the movement of water molecules across the membrane. It's still moving from high to low concentration, but osmosis is just that technical term for talking about how water can enter and exit the cell. So you should have filled in diffusion and water for these last two bullets on the front side of your handout. So go ahead and flip to the back of your handout where we have a couple quick examples. And you have two different diagrams here, and these diagrams have different symbols representing just any kind of molecule. And also in the middle of each diagram is a semi-permeable membrane. So based on what you know about osmosis and diffusion, moving from high to low concentrations across the membrane, take a few seconds and predict where you think these molecules will move in this first diagram and where you think the molecules will move in the second diagram. So when I look at the first diagram here, the first thing that I think of is to try to figure out what the concentration is. So if I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I have 8 of these sun-type molecules on the left-hand side of the membrane, and I have 1, 2, 3 molecules on the right side of the membrane. So I would call the left side of the membrane my high concentration, and I'm going to call the right side of the membrane my low concentration. And this is really the hardest part. When you get questions in the HSA, you need to stop and think about where's the high concentration and where's the low concentration. So if that's my high and my low concentration, then the molecules are going to be moving to the right, from the left side to the right side because of diffusion. If I look at the second example, my second diagram, I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these molecules on the left side of the semi-permeable membrane, and I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 again on the right side of the semi-permeable membrane. When that's the case, when the concentrations are equal, we give that a special word and we say that's an equilibrium. And in that case, if you can't distinguish a high concentration from a low concentration, there's going to be no net movement of molecules whatsoever. So in the second example, there is going to be no movement because equilibrium has already been reached. So now I'm going to show you a really quick mini experiment to model this. And this experiment is one that we see pretty often on the HSA in terms of showing you a diagram of what a diffusion experiment could look like. So you need to get just a little bit of background first. So I'm under the experiment section of your handout. And the first thing that you need to know is that we're talking about starch and iodine. Iodine molecule has a yellowish/reddish color, and it's really small. Molecular